pen and fill the paper with the message that it wants to send.
Hello and welcome to the Aviatrix Writers Room. I'm Liz Booker. The Writers Room grew out of the Aviatrix Book Club as our authors and aspiring writers began to meet and network. Our goal in sharing our writing and publishing journeys is to inspire and offer a flight plan for other women in aviation to tell their stories and to elevate the collective quality of our work to make it more accessible to a broader audience. This is why I spend a portion of my author interviews specifically focused on writing and publishing. I also occasionally invite special guests with specific expertise of interest to our community. My guest today is an author, editor, and publisher with over 2 decades in the industry. She is the publisher of She Writes Press and Spark Press, president of Warner Coaching, Inc., and author of Write On Sisters, Greenlight Your Book, What's Your Book, and 3 books on memoir. She's a TEDx speaker and the former executive editor of Seal Press. She currently sits on the boards of the Independent Book Publishers Association, the Bay Area Book Festival, and the National Association of Memoir Writers. She writes a monthly column for Publishers Weekly and is a podcaster with Grant Faulkner of NaNoWriMo, the weekly show Right Minded. You can find her at brookewarner.com and shewritespress.com. Brooke Warner, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
I'm so excited to meet you and to talk with you. You have so much to offer my little community of Aviatrix writers, and I know they're going to love this. I've heard you do some other interviews, so I've learned a lot about what you're doing, and I love all of it. And then yesterday I had the opportunity to watch your 2017 TEDx talk, The Greenlight Revolution, Your Creative Life on Your Terms. I thought it was wonderful, and I'll make sure that I put a link in the show notes so that everybody has an opportunity to go watch that. But I want to know, I already know a little bit about it, but tell us how, you came to She Writes and Sparks Press and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thank you. I actually co-founded She Writes in 2012. And so the story is that I came to She Writes from traditional publishing. I had been working in traditional publishing for 13 years prior to that. And I left traditional publishing for all the reasons that I share in my TEDx talk. I had come to a sort of point of disillusion with the traditional publishing space. A lot of what we're seeing in the news these days about the consolidation of publishing was very true 10 years ago and plus, that there's just a push to publish more celebrity books and books that have built-in platforms and authors that have built-in brands. And that was just not really the kind of publishing that I wanted to be doing. I was much more interested in an editorial focus, which was how I came up in publishing, always acquiring books based on the story and based on the book. And while, yes, the author matters, of course, not so much focus on the marketability of the author per se. And I think that's been the big push in publishing, that started before I left traditional publishing. And so I started She Writes Press to maintain that vision, just to have the vision of the editorial piece that I had always known and loved. And so She Writes Press from the beginning has been a hybrid press, meaning that we're a non-traditional business model that I could talk more about if we're interested in going down that direction. And then 2 years later, in 2014, we joined forces with Crystal Patriarch, who founded Spark Press, and I became the publisher of both imprints. And so I've been doing that ever since. And She Writes actually is 10 this year.
Oh, congratulations. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
And it looks like you're doing wonderful things. I've looked at your lists and everyone I've heard talk with you talks about the beautiful covers, which we'll definitely talk about, because that really is a huge plus on your side. Like when I compare self-published books to published books and seeing what you guys are doing in that space. So give us like a little bit more about how it works. And a lot of the people in my group are published already and have already navigated this path, but then we have a lot of people coming to it who are just thinking about writing. And so help us understand the distinction of a hybrid press from those other options of traditional and self-publishing.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I mean, hybrid is sort of an old new space, I like to say, because in some ways it's been around forever, and that traditional publishing houses have been cutting hybrid deals for a long time with entrepreneurial authors. And the idea behind it is that the author pays something. It might be the entire publishing cost, it could be parts of it, it could be the print run, whatever it is that the author is investing it, and they're getting a higher royalty as a result. And so in that way, it's like a partnership publishing or co-publishing arrangement where the publisher is not fronting all of the costs. And since they're not fronting all the costs, the author gets a much higher royalty. And so that's the essence of the model, of the business model of hybrid publishing. And so we started as a hybrid publisher because I legacy publishers have to have angel investors. There has to be some kind of deep pockets, which is why it's actually quite difficult to start a publishing company, a traditional publishing company anyway. And I mainly just wanted to give authors a platform, an opportunity. And a lot of authors were interested in self-publishing, but they didn't want to do it all themselves. And then the other issue with self-publishing, even if you do it all yourself and you're savvy and you learn the business, the downside of self-publishing always is distribution. There's always that missing piece for authors, because you can get your book out and available on Amazon and all kinds of other platforms, but it's very difficult to get your book reviewed. It's very difficult to get into libraries and other retail spaces. And so one of the things we've been able to do, which has been such a game changer for us, is to have traditional distribution. So the primary things that make us hybrid are, we act like a traditional publisher in many ways. We vet the manuscripts. We operate like a traditional house. We have traditional distribution. But where we are not traditional and never will be is that the authors, it's an author subsidized business model. And then the authors get 60% on print and 70% on ebook. So a much higher royalty than the traditional space.
What is the average in the traditional space?
Well, by comparison, I believe the standard royalties for traditional at this point are between 7.5% to 10% on print. And then on ebooks, normally about 25%. So we are giving a much higher royalty, which is expected. That's kind of the idea. If you're fronting the money, then you have a higher possibility of earning those expenses back if you are keeping the lion's share of the royalties.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And, then if you throw an agent in there who's getting a
Right.
portion of that advance, yeah, so that's a big deal. Um, well, I went on the websites, both for She Writes and for Sparks, and you helped me understand why you have the two different imprints, because I was wondering why there were two. And then
Right.
you've got like all your submission guidelines on there, but tell us a little bit about what you're looking for in a manuscript and what kinds of manuscripts you'll consider.
Yeah, I mean, what we're really looking for in the manuscripts is editorial quality. We're looking for a good story. We're looking for, I mean, we publish primarily fiction and memoir, but also other kinds of books. It's just that fiction and memoir is probably 80% of our list. And so when we're reading fiction and memoir, it's really about the story. It's a question of, what is the deeper meaning in here, which are, the answers are different depending on whether you're writing fiction and memoir and who the audience is. But we're looking for a cohesive story that holds together, for good writing. And we're not evaluating manuscripts like traditional publishing is on the author herself. We are, of course, interested in the author, but it's not, you don't have to come to us with an already established brand. You don't have to have a giant social media following. So it really is about the book. And that was always my original vision, because what was happening when I was working in traditional publishing was I was going to editorial meetings and I would fall in love with a book and I would bring it to the staff meetings where we were going to acquire, and I would just be gushing over the project. And the marketing team would be there and say, well, who's the author? What does she look like? What's her social media presence? What's her following? Blah, 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 blah. And then the book would be shot down based on those external factors and nothing to do with editorial. And it was incredibly disheartening because I was coming from the editorial side, not the marketing side. And that is a really common kind of thing that you'll see unfold in acquisitions meetings these days at big houses.
Wow, that's, yeah. Do you consider this hybrid space to be a disruptor? I mean, that's what it feels like to me.
Definitely. I mean, especially initially, I mean, now that I'm 10 years in, I don't feel so disruptive as I did, in the early days. When I was, 1, 2, 3 years in, I was fighting all the time, like for legitimacy and doing lots of advocacy. And it's not to say we don't still need that. We do. And also more hybrid publishers are entering the marketplace at all times. But now what I think we need is more standards. It used to be like, we're very disruptive, we're doing this new thing, but then of course it was successful. And so people have flooded the space. And so what I feel is more important now is having some sort of measures for authors and for the industry so that they know which hybrids are reputable, which ones are really doing the good work and serving authors well. Because whenever you have a successful kind of business model and then other people come in, some of them are really legitimate, with good hearts and desire to help authors, but some of them are misrepresenting themselves and at the very worst, sometimes predatory.
Oh, well, so on this topic, like what should authors be looking for and what distinguishes you in the space from other reputable hybrid publishers?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I did that I'm really proud of in 2018, I believe it was work with the Independent Book Publishers Association to create a hybrid criteria. And so we developed some points on a like a checklist, basically, that authors can look at and say, okay, a hybrid publisher has to check all these boxes. So that is available on the Independent Book Publishers Association website. And I think that's a hugely valuable resource. And so then you can distinguish between, who's doing what they're supposed to be doing and who's doing whatever and still calling themselves hybrid. And then what distinguishes us, I mean, I really think we've been at it for a long time. We came onto the scene. We're not the oldest hybrid by any means, but we're one of the ones that's been around the longest, and we're one of the most award winning. And so as such, I see myself as setting some kind of standard. But I think it's always the case that 10 years in, the proof is in the sales. The proof is in the fact that the books have done well, that we have incredible distribution into all kinds of marketplaces, that we're not just putting the books up on Amazon, we're getting into bookstores, retailers, libraries, wholesalers. So for me, it's really about the reach is hugely important, and also the demonstrated sales and the reputation. It's not that every single author has had a glowing experience with us. People get disappointed, and not all books sell super well, but by and large, I think we're doing a giant service to the authors, and our books are bearing out and selling, and the press has a really glowing reputation.
That's wonderful. And that's what I have seen everywhere when I've read about it. So I think that's all fantastic that you put that work into it to make it so legitimate and accepted
Thank
in the
you.
community. So let's get into some of the details. If somebody was interested in submitting a manuscript, I saw that you have all of your submission requirements online. Can you talk a little bit about how you're vetting? Like, what does that process look like when they pay the $35 and send? I think I read that you wanted the first 50 pages and then chapter summaries for fiction and something different for memoir.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's the same process, actually. So the issue is like some authors, depending on their genre, may not have chapter summaries. I mean, sometimes a poet or someone will write me and say, do I have to submit it like that? And we can work with people. But yeah, so the reason we want the chapter summaries is because we're reading the first 50 pages. So we want all the spoilers, right? We want to know what happens, but we're going to read 50 pages. And it's a 2-tiered process. So we have an outside reading committee that does the first tier, and then they place it either on yes, it's ready for publishing, or actually we think this manuscript needs more work. And so it goes on a coaching track. Now, of course, authors who go on a coaching track don't have to opt into coaching. Sometimes they do. And sometimes they're like, well, that's not what I wanted. And so they move on. And in that case, it's kind of like a soft rejection. But the people who go on the publishing track, basically go on to the second tier. And the second tier is an in-house review. And then we're a team of 5 on the publishing staff, and we have acquisitions meetings weekly, and we divvy up the submissions and read them and talk about them. And then again, either place the authors on what we call the green light track, which is basically publish ready, or we have other tiers where maybe the scope is too big. We like the idea, but the scope is too big, or maybe the chapter summaries didn't hold together, or maybe, in fact, there's larger developmental issues. So whatever is happening at that second tier level, we're giving an assessment that says what we think needs to be done. And or sometimes the books, of course, are publish ready. People always ask the percentage of books that make it to, both tiers to green light for publication. And it's usually about 8 to 10% of our submissions. And largely those people, they have worked their butts off, right? I mean, they maybe have already worked with a coach. A lot of them have been agented and their agents couldn't sell the books for whatever reason. So it's not the case that people are just scattershot like, oh, let's just see what happens. They've oftentimes put tons of work into these manuscripts, and they know that they're ready and have had multiple edits. And so those people, of course, are a dream to work with when they come through. But if someone is coming in less ready, we'll let them know, and that maybe is sometimes expected and sometimes a disappointment, kind of depending on the author and where their mindset is.
Is it something where, I know if you submit your manuscript to an agent once, they say no, they're never again do they want to see it unless they've invited you to revise and resubmit.
Right.
How does it work for you if it's kind of a red light for you at that point? Will you take a resubmission?
No, people can resubmit, and we encourage it. I mean, I think sometimes people submit, they're not ready because they don't know what they don't know. Sometimes people have been told by friends and family that their work is amazing, and they're surprised to get feedback that it's actually not quite there yet. Sometimes people really need to learn how to write in scene. And, I don't begrudge authors that lack of understanding. And I have worked with enough authors over the years to know that people can get there with the right kind of support. That's why I'm a coach myself. And so I believe in the power of coaching. I've seen people have tremendous ahas, and I've seen people come to me with very raw material and shape it into something incredibly beautiful. So I think people need to have that opportunity. So our goal is not so much to say like, no, you are barred forever, but to say, look, you're not there yet, go back and work on it. And then if we're still someplace that you're interested in publishing on, we would love to see a resubmission.
And I saw that you are basically booked through publication through 2024. So it doesn't feel any different really from a traditional publishing timeline in that regard. So tell me a little bit about that, like you're limiting your list. I've heard it called a curated list. So tell us a little bit about that and what timelines people can expect.
Our timeline is like a traditional publisher because of our traditional distribution. So in an ideal world, I think that, a good hybrid press should have traditional distribution because it's a way that you get the books out into the marketplace in a much more meaningful way. But in our criteria that we developed, we didn't say that traditional distribution was absolutely mandatory, but that some sort of active distribution be mandatory. But the deal is that if you have traditional distribution, you are adhering to the guidelines that are set up by your distributor, which is therefore totally in line with traditional publishing. So like our new season, we just kicked off our fall 2023 season. And so we're getting started way more than a year in advance for fall 2023 publication. And so the timelines, yeah, I mean, we're getting booked. I think this is actually a result of the pandemic personally, that we have just gotten a lot more submissions because people were writing during the pandemic or had this moment where they're like, the world is ending and I've always wanted to write a book. So let's do this now before it's too late. So the direct result for us has just been increased submissions, and we are not going to grow indefinitely. I'm not interested in publishing 100 books a season. We cap the list at 50 books. And so as such, we're only publishing 50 books a season. And so what that means is that people are spilling on to subsequent seasons. And that's hard sometimes. I mean, I hate to let people down, who are very eager and have the sense that fall 2024, spring 2025 are way too far into the future. But I also have felt very strongly that we have to hold some kind of line.
No, I understand. And I can only imagine with, how much work goes into it and all the prep to get it ready, not just for publication, but also to get it into, I understand that you also do reviews and let's talk about that relationship. So once a manuscript is accepted and they're on the publication track, what are the services that you're offering and how does that relationship look at that point?
Yeah, I mean, we only have a publishing package. It's like there's not a whole lot of add-ons. It's like, this is what we do, and that's it. And so the publishing side is very clear. I mean, it's just pushing the book through the publication process. It's everything. I mean, the authors are not, they're not responsible for anything other than turning in their manuscript, right? So we do a proofread, the cover, the interior design, the ebook conversion, all of the things, obviously the relationship with our distributor, which is very key, the management. What is not included is publicity. And so authors do have to hire their own publicists. And so sometimes authors, I mean, I would say 90% of our authors hire publicists. So maybe the 10% who don't, I always just say, well, maybe they don't have or need to have giant expectations. I think that's an important piece. The people are publishing for lots of different reasons. And sometimes people who come to us are, in fact, publishing kind of a legacy book. It's their one book that they want to publish and they want to do it right. And they want to be able to get it reviewed and they want it to be more widely distributed than just throwing a book up on Amazon, which is fine, but that's also very limiting, in the giant scope of the world of book publishing. But most of the authors who come with us have, very high ambitions. And I think if you have high ambitions, you have to hire a publicist. It's actually quite important to be able to meet the books going out into the world with a strong publicity push. And so we have recommended publicists that we offer to the authors. They're not required to hire, but we kind of work with authors around education and to understand the value of a publicist, how they would work with a publicist. And then, our parent company is Spark Point Studio. And Spark Point Studio has a publicity arm. And so we have an in-house publicity solution, which a lot of authors take us up on and do. And it's an add-on. I mean, it's not included in the cost of the publishing package, but lots and lots of authors also hire outside publicists. So it's a combination or, kind of a mosaic.
One of the things that I love most about what you're doing is a feeling of transparency about what's available and what's going on, because it's right there on the screen when you go to the website. Right. It's $8,500. Here's what you're going to get. And here's the exactly. percentage of the take that you're going to get. Whereas, those of us who haven't published yet and are considering navigating the traditional publishing landscape are like, well, what does that mean? Like how much is this person going to get, and the advances and the disparities in advances and all of these things. It's so nice to have a place where you can go and it's completely straightforward. So I really appreciate that about your model. Thinking about, I have a question that I didn't include in my list ahead of time, but it's something that I'm curious about for my own work. You mentioned that people publish for different reasons, and I'm living in this sort of niche world of women in aviation where our stories, and one of my goals is for our stories to reach a broader audience. And that's, my hope for making sure that our aspiring authors have the tools to elevate the quality of their work and know and have the information so that they know how to do it right. So, but one of the things I always think about is the lifespan of a book. And tell me a little bit about it in contrast, or is it similar to in traditional publishing where, sales drop off the mainstream, the book comes off, your copyright was with that publisher, you may or may not have it in your contract, you can get it back. How does that work with you? Because what I know is that if an author in our community publishes and it goes mainstream a little bit, they will always have a refreshing audience in our tight community of women in aviation. So they may have a book that did okay and then maybe fell off if they did it traditionally, but they're still going to have an audience. So how does that work with you?
Yeah, I mean, in our case, the copyright stays with the author. We copyright the book in the author's name. We're the publisher of record, right? Which means that you are using our ISBN and our logo, and you're selling the book under She Writes Press or Spark Press. But the copyright is filed in the author's name. And so that's very important. And the rights stay with the author. And we're on the transparency thing that you said. I mean, not only is transparency really important to me and to the press, but so is just the facility for authors to be able to get their rights back or to turn the rights back over to us. We have a lot of movement of rights. For instance, an author may decide to let us keep audio rights, but if we can't sell their audio rights to a third-party publisher, oftentimes the authors want the rights back because they want to self-produce their audiobooks. That's in everyone's best interest. So we'll give the rights back with a simple email saying, I want my rights back. And the same goes for foreign rights. It's actually very easy to transfer rights. And so traditional publishing, I think, sort of hoards rights because they believe, rightfully so, that they can make money off of that, that it's an asset. But of course, in our business model, because the author is the one subsidizing the publication, it would be ridiculous for us to hoard the rights. We want to try to sell them on behalf of the author because the author will make money. But if we're struggling to do that or we can't do that for whatever reason and the author has a lead on it and they want to do it themselves, then great. And in the flip situation, we had something happened recently where the author maintained her movie rights. So derivative rights are umbrella rights that include movie rights. Lots of authors want to keep derivative rights for obvious reasons. They're like, oh, well, I might have a movie or a spinoff or whatever. In this case, this author got a movie deal. Lifetime approached her for a movie, which is super exciting, but she did not have an agent. And so she said, I want to give you guys the rights back because I want you to negotiate and sell the deal for me because we're able to negotiate a much higher amount of money for her than she felt comfortable doing on her own. She didn't want to speak to the studio executives about her contract, about money. So in that case, she reverted the derivative rights back to us. And so that kind of flow, I think, is in everyone's interest. If she had had an agent or if she had had the savvy to do the negotiating herself, cool, but not so. And so we do it for her. And it just, I just don't really subscribe to this belief of holding on to rights or being stingy about rights because it doesn't benefit the author. And it also just frankly doesn't benefit the publisher. So, and then the other thing is that we can and do terminate rights upon request of the author. If the author says, I have another opportunity or I don't want to be published by you guys anymore, they literally just have to send an email saying, I want to terminate my contract. And that's it. I mean, it takes 30 days or so for us to remove the listings and, all of that stuff. But we would never just hold on to a book or continue to publish a book if an author decided that they wanted to be released.
That is so great. So great to help me understand it, first of all, and also wonderful to know that opportunity exists. I have a couple more questions that are sort of in the weeds and on behalf of my community. Um, if an author didn't know what they didn't know and ended up either self-publishing or going through, some kind of publisher that didn't do the right things for them and they want to kind of repackage their book, clean it up, and publish it, is that a manuscript you would consider?
Yeah, definitely. We have reissued self-published books and books by authors, who went with other publishers that they were discontent with. So there's precedent on both sides of that. They just have to submit like a regular project. And a lot of times, if a book is already self-published, I would just as soon see the self-published actual book. And so sometimes people just send it to me in the mail so that I can take a look at it and I'll read the first 50 pages. So yeah, we and historically they've always been repackaged. I mean, we have to put a new cover on it. We often redesign it. A lots of times those books are good books, but they don't look good. So, again, they're no fault of the author necessarily. But I think that's the downside of self-publishing, is that lots of people are self-publishing really beautifully. Many people are hiring out and, getting consultants or have learned a lot about publishing and know what they're doing. But as many people or more don't know what makes a good book cover, don't know what they're not seeing. And so that's something that, I part of the advocacy work I do is really around like standards in book publishing, trying to help all indie authors understand the value of making sure that your book adheres to traditional standards, because industry people will just pick up a book and see one thing and go, and dismiss it. And it's just, it's so, there's so much at stake to getting it right. So I think that's true whether you're doing hybrid or self.
I just keep loving everything you're doing even more and more as we talk. It's so great. Um,
Oh, thank you.
I want to know from your perspective, looking across your clients' work, what do you think differentiated the more successful authors from those who maybe didn't sell as much? Keeping
Yeah,
in
I
mind
mean,
that everybody has a different intent and a different audience for their work.
sure.
Yeah.
We have a lot of authors who are very savvy self promoters. I think there's really something about getting comfortable with authentic promotion. There are so many people who write books and are shy, feel like they're bragging, don't know how to sell themselves. It's a skill. It's something that some people have naturally, but some people have to learn. And I feel like I've been on my own learning curve there to be like, if you're proud of something, you're not selling it. You're just authentically saying, this is what I've done and I want to share it with the world. And so the people who are successful are the ones who are that way about their books and they feel comfortable talking literally to almost everyone, and their book is forefront in their mind, right? So they go someplace and they remember to take their book or remember to take their collateral materials. The shy ones are like, they go places and they're like, oh, I didn't even bring a book, I didn't even bring a business card, right? So there's just something about being out in the world as an author who's legitimately interested in spreading the word about the book that you've written. I think that's the difference. I mean, it's partly personality, but it's partly something that anyone can learn. And or to shed old ways of being, like you don't have to be that way. Step into the light. You've published a book. You're a published author. So I do try to support authors with that as much as I can.
That's so great. I actually, as I've gotten to know this community, I can spot the ones now who are doing that well. And then I want to just grab the other ones by the shoulder and say, come on, you have such a fabulous story. Get out there and tell everyone about it. And I've been, I get it because I wasn't comfortable with the idea of self-promotion in any way, shape, or form. Not even, I don't even have anything published yet. So, but in practice for that, I have been honing those skills by promoting other people's work, which is easy. you know?
Right, totally. And I think that you can look at promoting other people's work and then ask yourself, can I do this for myself? What can I apply that I feel so authentically and passionate about other people into my own work? So it's still good
Absolutely.
practice.
Yeah. I have, I want to hear all about sort of the other stuff you have going on, but is there anything else that you would want an audience to know about She Writes, Sparks Press, or anything on this topic before we move on?
I just always encourage people, whether they want to consider She Writes or Spark Press or another hybrid publisher, to buy the books, to take a look, read a couple, talk to the community. I mean, one of the things that, and it sounds like because you have a community too of women in aviation, which is so cool. I mean, it's one of the things I'm most proud of, actually, aside from the obvious, like the books themselves and the press, but is our community, that we just have this incredible force of women, and they support one another and they champion each other and they share ideas and resources. And so, and I know that it's a real asset that we bring to the authors, because that's one thing I hear back from people, how much they love the community. So I just thought I would share that. I think it's something that sets us apart from other hybrids, but also from traditional publishing.
Yeah, I loved hearing about that too, because that's what we're doing in our community, is trying to support each other and cross promote and just kind of foster the elevating the entire community instead of it all being about yourself. So I have heard in some of your talks you kind of talking about hybrid and the sort of your reason for going there, being because sometimes authors have a really good book and they can't get it published traditionally. And I'm writing in the young adult space. And so I'm kind of been, programmed to understand that really, if I want my book to reach the broadest audience and get into schools and school libraries and those kinds of things, then I really need to go to the traditional route. But can an author, and I'm asking across genre, but also selfishly about YA, because I'm so excited about everything that you're doing. Can an author who has a reasonable expectation of potentially selling her book traditionally, would you recommend considering doing hybrid, or where do you think we are on that?
You know, I really understand the dream of traditional publishing. I came out of 13 years of traditional publishing. I think there are a lot of legacy publishers that are still doing a great job, meaningful work, of course, and then you get paid, or at least you get everything taken care of. So I don't pretend that to tell anyone like, oh, forget traditional publishing and just start with hybrid. I think for people who really harbor the dream of traditional publishing, I always say, go try, see what's out there for you, but don't spend forever out there. Don't just like waste years and years and years. So it's like, you get yourself ready, you go and you try to find an agent or you try to find a publisher. And if that works and it feels like a good fit and you're excited about that possibility, then that's a wonderful option. That is not what normally happens. What normally happens is that authors bang their heads up against a wall. They just get rejected, or they get some bites, but people are like, oh, hey, have you thought about making your female protagonist a male? Have you thought about, just all these changes to your story that are inauthentic and things that you don't want to do? So mostly what I am hearing over and over and over again is people's horror stories of trying to shop their manuscripts, and then they end up with looking at other options. So I am realistic about seeing us as a backup. Sometimes we are someone's first choice, but we're usually a first choice when someone really understands how difficult the traditional industry is. But for people with aspirations for traditional, like I said, I always say I don't mind being a backup, because I think that we end up being a wonderful second choice for a lot of people. And then they're usually like quite happy or even relieved. But I've long used the analogy of traditional publishing being like the Ivy Leagues, that it is the same. Not everybody gets into Harvard or Yale, and nor is Harvard or Yale necessarily a wonderful experience for all of the people who end up going there. So I think it's important to look at it in that way. And then if you end up with hybrid publishing, maybe it's like, well, you ended up going to like a really great state school, but you had a better experience, right? So that's just a way to look at the whole landscape of publishing, because there's no one right way. And even as a hybrid publisher, I'm publishing agnostic. I just want people to publish. I don't care if they self-publish, if they traditional publish, but what we're offering is just, I think, a really important other way in the industry for those people who are finding challenges, on either side, who don't want to self-publish or for whatever reason don't want to or can't traditionally publish.
Well, I have to tell you, I don't harbor any fantasies about traditional publishing. I harbor fantasies about selling books and my books getting into
Right.
the hands of young people. That's what I want. And the only reason I continue to, like, my brain goes down that track is because I have been told again and again that that's really the only way to get my book into the hands of young people. But I am very excited about like I said before, the transparency, the control, and the portion of your work that continues to be yours, that is offered by your model while still producing a quality product. So I'm just going to put
Well,
that out
and
there.
to piggyback on that before we end this part of the conversation is that what you're talking about, why people are probably saying you have to publish traditionally, is really what they mean is access, right? And we are bringing, and a lot of hybrids are bringing that access, because if you can get reviewed in the school library journal and your books can go into libraries and you have the kind of distribution mechanism that we provide at our press, you are getting all of that. And so I think that's the other thing is, when I started this press, we did not yet have distribution. And that was the thing that I was like, oh no, we can't continue. We're not going to rise to that next level until we have the traditional distribution, because so many authors like you, they want to have all of those channels open, and they want to, of course, be able to reach their readers. So you're right. You wouldn't be a great candidate for self-publishing because of the limitations that I mentioned from the very beginning. Self-publishing is a great option, but you can't get past those firewalls. And so I think that's, again, why hybrid offers a really meaningful alternative for people.
That's really exciting to me. So we have other things. You're a busy lady, like you're running this, but you have all of these other little spin-off things that you do that are related to writing and publishing. First of all, let's hear about your books.
Yeah, I have written 3 books about memoir, because that's kind of my passion genre. And I've written 3 books about writing and publishing. So yeah, and I'm, just beginning to like finally step into the probability that my next book is going to be a memoir, which is exciting to me. And so, yeah, I've just written and published books to support all of my ideas, as I've been walking this path of hybrid publishing and teaching memoir, which is my other passion.
Yeah, we scheduled this interview pretty quickly after we got in touch, and I would love to have had the opportunity to read them before I talk to you, but I have them on order. And you
Oh,
also
thank you.
do classes, and it's probably going to be too late by the time we, broadcast this interview for the upcoming seminar on memoir. I'm not looking to write memoir myself right now, but it is a significant portion of the genres that we look at and people are writing in our community. And so I've continued to educate myself about memoir over the past couple of years through this project. But tell us about these classes that you offer, not just that one, but in general, and where people can find information about them.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, so Magic of Memoir is, we do usually like an event every spring and fall. So even if this airs and that class is ending or over, there will be something coming in the spring. And then I teach with Linda Joy Myers, who runs the National Association of Memoir Writers. We co-teach a lot of classes on memoir. We run a 6-month class every 6 months, so it starts in January and it starts again in June. So people, if this is running in the fall, can check that out and see, the upcoming class will be starting in January, or the subsequent one would be starting in June of next year. And yeah, I've just been teaching memoir. When I left traditional publishing, anybody who has like done their own thing knows you sort of step off a ledge, right? You're like, oh, I'm leaving my real job and stepping into some unknown future. And I had like more than one parachute. It's like I have the publishing parachute and I have the memoir teaching parachute. And so, interestingly, these classes that I've been teaching on memoir completely coincide with starting the press. And so, and they have also been successful, to my great delight. We love teaching memoir and we have a lot of students interested in what we're doing. And I think also memoir in the past 10 years has really exploded as a genre. So in some ways we were sort of ahead of that trend as well. So it's been very rewarding. Yeah, so the coaching, I do that the least of everything. I take on some coaching clients here and there. So I have the luxury to be selective. I used to coach a lot more. Things have just, changed over the course of just getting busier with the press. But yeah, I do one-on-one coaching with authors, and that's usually taking a manuscript from either idea to completion, or sometimes, and honestly more commonly, people contact me because there's something, they know something is wrong. It's not getting picked up. They feel like they're getting feedback that that it's not landing, it's not resonating. They want to know why. So I kind of will do a diagnostic and then advise them, either here's what I'm seeing and what you might improve. And then maybe we coach, by going through the entire manuscript together. So it's really rewarding. One of the things I most love about working one-on-one with authors is that it keeps me in the trenches. It's like the development of a manuscript, I think, is a very particular kind of journey. And I never want to let that go, because it also keeps you in touch with, the real emotion of writing a book, that it's not just some side project that you take on. It takes all of you. It's like, it's your creativity, it's your vulnerability, it's a piece of you that you're like birthing into the world. And I feel like staying in touch with authors who are doing that process makes me a better publisher.
That's wonderful. And then you have a podcast with a co-host from NaNoWriMo.
Yeah. Grant and we've long been friends and kind of run in the same publishing circles, and we're both live here in Berkeley. And so we decided to do this podcast together, and we're in year 5, which is insane to me. I was joking with someone recently, like, that was longer than I went to high school, like that. It's been longer than 4 years is kind of an amazing thing. But yeah, it's a weekly podcast and it's just writing inspiration. But since he's with NaNoWriMo, which is very fiction based, and since most of my stuff is more memoir based, we really blend well. We bring a combination of memoirists and novelists onto the show. And I think no matter what genre you're working in, you can learn so much from other people in other genres, because they're tackling some of the same things, and so, yeah, I love it. It's very fun for us to do together.
That's awesome. So remind us, I'm going to ask you one more question before we wrap up, but remind us where we can find you, all the places.
I think the easiest place is just me, BrookeWarner.com, because if you go to BrookeWarner.com, there's links to all the things, like my podcast, my memoir classes, the press. I obviously have like a lot of URLs, but that's the central one.
Okay, great. So my last question for you, Brooke, is what advice or encouragement would you have for our women in aviation who are pilots first? They've maybe had a career in aviation, or they're in the middle of it and they have a story to tell, but they're not writers. What advice do you have for them?
I think if you have a story to tell and you really are ready to tell it, to just start writing and see what comes up. I think the biggest thing is like, oh, I'm not a writer, or you start to judge yourself, or you feel like you don't know what you're doing, but there are so many resources out there. And so the first thing is to put words on the page and then see, how does that feel to you? Is it exciting? Is it daunting? After you write 10 pages, do you want to keep going? And some people just know they have like a really profound story. Maybe they will even partner with a ghostwriter. But most people I find will start to write and feel like, wow, this is something that maybe I'm not the best, but I can get better and I want to learn more and I want to learn how to write scenes. And it's, I always think that writing is a wonderful second career because it's something that is so much about self-expression. And if you've lived an exciting life, which anyone who's a woman in aviation has to have, then it just is like, it's a great next step. So I would just say, go for it and try to set the judgments aside and, see where you land once you're some pages in.
I had the best experience at the last Women in Aviation International Conference, where I have this new community of writers and readers around these books. But I also was in touch with my former Coast Guard community. And one of my colleagues from the Coast Guard, who's still in the trenches, she's still doing it, came up to me and said, I started writing. And she said it just like that. And she said, it's so cathartic.
Yeah.
And I said, you go, girl. And I can't wait to see what she does with it eventually. So, Brooke, thank you so much for your time and for everything that you're doing. It's very inspiring, and very empowering, I think, is the main thing.
Good luck to all of the women out there in your community. I really appreciate you having me on, and good luck to you with your own book. We'll be in touch and you'll let me know where you land.
Thanks so much for listening. If you're a woman in aviation and an aspiring or published author, please join us in the Aviatrix Writers Group on Facebook and check the show notes to sign up for the monthly Literary Aviatrix newsletter, where I include links to writing workshops and events like the ones Brooke offers. Thank you to Shasta Ways and Michael Wilds of the Women's Soar Group for their assistance in producing this interview. The Women's Soar Group is a media company that gives women a platform to express themselves. Blue skies and happy writing.
To save for later, you cannot trust it to come again. To wait for you to find a pen and fill the paper